Here's another article from that Velikovsky page, Velikovsky archive, on Saturn and the Flood. The Worlds in Collision comprises only the last two acts of a cosmic drama, one that occurred in the middle of the second millennium before the present era, the other during the 8th and early part of the 7th century before the present era. Prior to the events described in Worlds in Collision, Venus, following its expulsion from Jupiter, was on a highly eccentric orbit for a period of time measured certainly by centuries, perhaps millennia, before its near encounters with the Earth. While the actual beginning of the drama is shrouded in the mist of gray antiquity and difficult to pinpoint with exactitude, there is a point at which a clearer picture emerges. This is the time when the two giant planets, Saturn and Jupiter, approached each other closely. Possibly they were close for a long period of time, passing near one another as they traveled along orbital paths quite dissimilar to those of today. Saturn and Jupiter are so often associated in cosmological history that sometimes I even considered the possibility that they may have constituted a double star system, in which there are many in the universe. I said that Saturn and Jupiter were stars, though today we know them as planets. Actually, in Worlds in Collision in the last chapter, I used the word star in referring to the two giant planets. There I wrote, with respect to the future, that some dark star like Jupiter or Saturn may be in the path of the Sun and may be attracted to the system and cause havoc in it. At that time it was said that they were planets, not stars, while today it is known that Jupiter and Saturn too are star-like, producing several times the amount of heat they receive from the Sun. The cosmological thought of ancient peoples conceived of the history of the Earth as divided into periods of time, each ruled by a different planet. Of these, the epoch of Saturn, or Kronos, was remembered as the time of bliss. It was made to precede the period during which Jupiter was the dominant deity. Insofar as I could understand the physical events that affected the globe in times preceding the Middle Kingdom in Egypt, I was able to explain them as the result of a disturbance in which both Jupiter and Saturn participated. Various peoples witnessed the events and described them as a celestial human drama in different forms. The Greek, for example, had Jupiter, Zeus, the son of Saturn, Kronos, dethrone his father and banish him, and take his place to become the supreme deity. In Egyptian folklore, or religion, the participants in the drama are said to be Osiris, Saturn, brother and husband of Isis, Jupiter. And it is not that the wife dethrones the husband, nothing of the kind. There is instead a fight going on in the sky, in which some body, described as Seth, attacks Osiris and kills, actually dismembers him. And after this, Isis travels in search of the dismembered parts of Osiris. You see how the two dramas are hardly at all alike. I believe that my long experience in interpreting dreams and associations of my fellow men probably was of help to me to see similarities where the similarities were not easily seen. The tractate Rakat of the Babylonian Talmud points to the celestial body Kima as the source of the Deluge. Kima is to be identified with Saturn. Also in the Mexican codices, it is said that the first world age, at the end of which the earth was destroyed by a universal deluge, and which was therefore called the Son of Water, or Atunatia, was presided over by Akati, or Saturn. The ancient sources all point to Saturn, but how did Saturn cause the deluge? What did really happen? Suppose the two bodies, such as Jupiter and Saturn, were to approach one another rather closely, so as to cause violent perturbations and huge tidal effects in each other's atmospheres. As a double star, or binary, they might interact to the extent that, under certain conditions, their mutual perturbations will lead to a stellar explosion, or nova. If what today we call Jupiter and Saturn are the products of such a sequence of events, their appearance and respective masses must therefore have been quite different. Prior to the cataclysmic disruption and dismemberment, Saturn must have exceeded Jupiter in size. At some point during a close approach to Jupiter, Saturn became unstable, and as a result of the influx of extraneous material, it exploded, flaring as a nova which, after subsiding, left a remnant that the ancients still recognized as Saturn, even though it was but a fraction of the size of the celestial body of earlier days. In Saturn's explosion, much of the matter absorbed earlier was thrown off into space. Saturn was greatly reduced in size and removed to a distant orbit. The binary system was broken up, and Jupiter took over the dominant position in the sky. The ancient Greeks saw this as Zeus, victorious over his father, forcing him to release the children he earlier had swallowed, and banishing him to the outer reaches of the sky. In Egyptians' eyes, it was Horus, Jupiter, assuming royal power, leaving Osiris to reign over the kingdom of the dead. My conclusion that, as a result of its interplay with Jupiter, Saturn exploded as a nova, I found confirmed in many ancient sources, in which Saturn is regularly associated with brilliant light. But I was led to this idea first of all by a certain clue contained in the biblical account of the Deluge. The story as found in the book of Genesis starts with these words, "And it came to pass after 7 days that the waters of the flood were upon the earth." Genesis 7:10. It is not explained after 7 days of what. Some words seem to be missing here from our text in the Old Testament. It is clear, however, that Isaiah refers to the same 7 days in his description of the messianic age to come, when the light of the moon shall be as the light of the sun, and the light of the sun shall be sevenfold, as the light of the 7 days. Isaiah 30:36. It is conceivable that the Earth was, at that time, a satellite of Saturn, afterward possibly becoming a satellite of Jupiter. With the end of the 7 days of light, the Earth became enveloped in waters of cosmic origin, whether coming directly from Saturn, and Saturn is known to contain water, or formed from clouds of hydrogen gas ejected by the nova, which combined by means of powerful electric discharges with the Earth's own free oxygen. There are definite indications of a drastic drop in the atmospheric oxygen at the time of the deluge. The survivors of the catastrophe are said in several sources to have been unable to light fires. The Midrashim and other ancient sources describe the waters of the flood as being warm. In addition, the waters may have been rich in chlorine, an element which in combination with sodium forms common salt. Marine geologists are unable to trace the origin of the huge amounts of chlorine locked in the salt in the Earth's oceans, the Earth's own rocks being rather poor in this element and incapable of supplying it in the needed quantities. Chlorine may thus be of extraneous origin, being a very active element that could possibly be present in some different combinations on Saturn. After the deluge, many forms of life came into being, especially plant life. Thus it happened that Saturn was later called the god of vegetation. Fraser, in his Golden Bow, considered Osiris and Tammuz to be nothing more than vegetation gods. So strong was Saturn's connection with the new forms in the plant kingdom that appeared following the deluge. A Midrashic source relates that during the deluge all volcanoes erupted, and other ancient accounts assert the same. Changes took place in the lithosphere as well as in the biosphere. More pronounced, however, were the changes in the hydrosphere. The volume of water on Earth was vastly increased, and it is of interest that the Atlantic Ocean was called by the ancients the Sea of Kronos, indicating that it came to be only after the deluge. The memory of these stupendous events survived for millennia, and vestiges of the cult of Saturn persist even till today. One of these memorials is the Feast of Light, celebrated in midwinter, Hanukkah or Christmas, both stemming from the Roman Saturnalia. All of these festivals of light have 7-day durations, as they commemorate the dazzling light in which the world was bathed for the 7 days preceding the deluge. In their original form, these festivals were a remembrance as a symbolic reenactment of the age of Saturn. It was said that in that age there had been no distinction between masters and servants. Thus in Rome, for the duration of the Saturnalia festival, household slaves were freed, and were actually waited upon by their masters. Also, the statue of Saturn, which used to stand in the Roman Forum, was for a time released from its bonds. This statue, which had bands around its feet, represented the planet Saturn with its rings. It was understood that it was Jupiter that had bound Saturn with these bonds after he had overthrown Saturn. Astronomers are unable to explain their origin, but they must have formed in that event in which Jupiter disrupted Saturn. There is evidence that the ancient Maoris of New Zealand were also aware of the rings around Saturn. They called the planet Pararat, which means her band quite surrounds her. Saturn was the chief deity of, among other people, the Phoenicians and the Scythians. In cuneiform sources, the Scythians also called Urnman Manda, or the people of Saturn. The Phoenicians used to bring human sacrifices to the planet, calling it Moloch, or king. Usually children were the victims, consumed by Moloch, as Saturn had devoured his own children. Porphyry records the persistence in some cities of the Greek world of human sacrifices to Saturn well into Roman times. And then here are the list of references that the numbers were in the article above.
The gas giant Saturn. It's the outermost planet visible to the naked eye, moving on an orbit almost 900 million miles from the Sun. For those untrained in finding planets in the night sky, it could hardly be said that Saturn stands out amongst its starry companions. This lack of distinction underscores an unsolved mystery. Where did all of the extravagant images attached to this distant speck in the sky come from? The story of Saturn as creator. Saturn presiding over a lost golden age. Saturn as a primeval sun. Saturn's preposterous location at the celestial pole around which the heavens visually turn. Saturn as the founding father of kings. And Saturn as dying or displaced God. In due course, we'll take up the god's connection to an immense crescent, seen as a scythe or sickle turning in the sky. So too the cosmic mountain, from which Saturn was said to have once ruled the world. And the planet god's role as divine ancestor of different nations, all recounting the same core idea. The mysteries will quickly overwhelm a researcher the moment he asks the present sky to explain the ancient themes. In fact, many scholars simply walked away from the dilemma. Here's the dilemma in a nutshell. The myths appear to be much older than any recorded observations of planets. The first flowering of the monumental civilizations occurred in an environment of myth and magic. There are no lists of planets, no diaries of planetary motions. The celebrated gods do not look at all like the planets we know so well today. So most scholars simply state that planetary behavior could not have provoked any of the great myths. The attachment of myths to planets must have come much later, perhaps in the first millennium BC. Our message, however, is that a radically different planetary arrangement prevailed in an earlier time. Planets, not in their present orbits, but planets, provoked all of the mythic archetypes. What we're offering in this series are reasons for known facts, things not disputed. This includes the fact that the astronomer priests themselves, in recording the tranquil and predictable motions of planets in later times, named these bodies explicitly as the great gods of the primeval epoch. And that's the heart of the dilemma. Why does the behavior of these most venerated gods so boldly contradict all observations of the named planets today? By working with the points of cross-cultural agreement, we'll see that the astronomical images of Saturn connect theme by theme with an archaic story told around the world, told long after most cultures had lost track of any planetary connections. The story says that in a former time, a central luminary, a motionless sun, turned as a great wheel in the sky. But why an identification with the planet Saturn? It's said that this ancient power, the father of kings, presided over an age of natural abundance and cosmic harmony. But this story, in its countless variations, does not end well. It states that the world fell into confusion when the ruling god fled the theater or tumbled from his appointed station. Then the hordes of chaos were set loose, and all of creation slipped into a cosmic night, the gods themselves battling furiously in the heavens, the clash of the Titans. In the well-known Greek tradition, this was the story of the displaced god Kronos, the father of kings. Kronos was the Greek name for the planet Saturn. And yet, enigmatically, the same planet was also named Helios, the sun, a fact that has perplexed classical scholars for a century and a half. The shadow cast by Saturn reached across the millennia. Even today, our language retains the age-old cultural ambivalence toward this most ancient god. The word Saturnian expresses the splendor of the Golden Age, while the word Saturnine reflects the melancholy of paradise lost. Guesses as to explanations will never work, but an explanation based on systematic, cross-cultural investigation will work, allowing a global story to mean what it says, even if that requires a measure of patience as verifiable pieces come one by one into a coherent picture of the ancient sky. In the celestial formation under discussion here, an unusual arrangement of planets occurred prior to the present organization of the solar system. The events were identified mythically with the lost age of gods and wonders. In a quasi-stable phase of this planetary configuration, the Earth rotated on a single axis with other planets extremely close to our own, such that the axis ran straight through the centers of the gathered bodies as they moved around the sun. The visual result was the appearance in the sky of what we've called the polar configuration. Astronomical traditions recalled this as the Great Conjunction of primeval times. But the events were recorded under many different names and many different mythic interpretations. It was some 40 years ago that we proposed the concept of planets axially aligned in a polar configuration. In the course of the investigation, the historical evidence itself forced a series of adjustments and extensions of the reconstruction in new directions. As one might imagine, scientifically astute acquaintances immediately declared the arrangement impossible, a glaring contradiction of Kepler's third law. That law would require that the orbital period of the outer body be longer and its orbital velocity slower than that of an inner body. Hence, a close gathering of planets could not stay in line as the bodies moved around the sun. But that was before the structural dynamicist Robert Grubaugh took an interest in the historical evidence and came forward with equations for collinear equilibrium of planet-sized bodies. Collinear equilibrium means equilibrium positions on a straight line running right through the centers of the bodies. Mathematically, at these positions, the bodies will in fact stay in line while moving as a congregation of planets around the Sun. Grubaugh's equations were subsequently confirmed by others, including the distinguished mathematician Dr. Robert Bass. Of course, no revelation about mathematical equilibrium could ever settle the complex issues posed by the reconstruction. It's the historical evidence that raises the questions in the first place and provides the acid tests. An acid test means a definitive test, a test the reconstruction must meet if valid, and a test that alternative explanations cannot meet. Consider the example of the Great Conjunction implicit in ancient imagery. When that phrase is used today, it refers to Jupiter overtaking Saturn in its orbit. By calling this close approach a Great Conjunction, modern-day astrologers and astronomers have effectively trivialized a foundational principle of a much more ancient language and symbolism. The Babylonian astronomer priest Berosus in the 3rd century BC stated the ancient idea unequivocally when he described a planetary arrangement ahead of world-altering catastrophe. Planets centered on a straight line. That's a remarkable statement with no rationale under common assumptions today and no analogy in any planetary observations in our own time. It is, however, a perfect description of the polar configuration as reconstructed from a global accord of ancient witnesses, of which a Babylonian priestly astronomer would have no knowledge. It's also a perfect description of collinear alignment as described mathematically by Robert Grubaugh. In Hindu accounts, we find the popular story of the great citadel of the gods, called Tripura. It was said that the towering citadel was formed by 3 primeval powers or celestial cities, first moving independently, then coming into perfect alignment. Perfect alignment such that a single arrow of Shiva could pierce the hearts of the gathered powers. But what was the arrow of Shiva? And what was the effect when it was launched against the towering citadel? What happened when the Great Conjunction dissolved into heaven-shattering catastrophe will be the subject of our next segment. We've said it before, and it bears repeating, that the first step in assessing the complex and extraordinary claims of this reconstruction is to be crystal clear as to the core details and their testable implications. This stylized form is the fulcrum of the reconstruction. From here we can look backwards and forwards to name critical events in the evolution of the configuration. We earlier named the planetary components. Saturn is the large sphere at the celestial pole, no rings at the time. Venus is the discharging star-like form on axis in the center of Saturn. And the smallest sphere, Mars, visually appearing within the sphere of Venus. We've called this a quasi-stable phase of an evolving or metamorphosing configuration. Episodic motions of Mars occurred along the axis, provoking streams of material alternately between Mars and Venus and between Mars and Earth. We also observed dramatic changes in the number of discharge streamers that stretched between Venus and Saturn. In episode 4, we described the emergence of a triangular form from the dusty plasma medium and a subsequent explosive discharge, producing a vast cloud of luminous and chaotic debris in the space surrounding the aligned bodies. Later appeared the 8-rayed star, the centerpiece of our chronology, marking a tentative stabilization of the discharge activity. We've noted as well that a libration occurred along the axis, such that from Earth the different discharge configurations were seen alternately on axis and off axis. For any assessment of this reconstruction, the shifts in three-dimensional vantage point will be essential. In the early phases of the configuration, the interplanetary medium prevented observation of the Sun as a discrete sphere, though the Sun's lighting effects on the configuration become quite clear with the appearance of the crescent on Saturn. This meant not only a reduction in the surrounding dusty plasma medium, but a more clearly defined cycle of day and night. At the polar location, the crescent visually revolved around the polar center with the rotation of the Earth in a daily cycle of dimming and brightening. Closely associated with the appearance of this turning crescent was the descent of material from Mars. The first effect was a luminous spike reaching Earthward. As Mars moved closer to the Earth, the downward stream of material extended well below the visible sphere of Saturn, eventually connecting with the circumpolar region of the Earth. It seems that over time, the eightfold Venus discharge was compressed into just 4 directional streamers, expanding across the face of Saturn. This phase seems to have merged insensibly with another, as a dusty plasma column between Mars and Venus exhibited a conical form when seen slightly off-axis, while appearing as a bright equatorial band around Mars when viewed on-axis. Metamorphosis continued with the progressive displacement of Venus and Mars from their axial positions, the plasma stream between the two bodies taking on a spiraling form. As we'll see in due course, with continued displacement, the spiraling plasma stream between Mars and Venus gave way to a chaotic, undulating appearance as the configuration itself grew catastrophically unstable. The violent episodes that followed marked the most terrifying events in all of human history. The disastrous interlude between the dismemberment of the configuration and a spectacular phase of reconstruction. In these discourses, we followed the evolution of a planetary configuration close to Earth stretching across the ancient sky. Centered at the North Celestial Pole, it remained stationary for an extended period at this position. That's the underlying nature of the primeval sun remembered around the world. We've noted that the named planets progressively emerged from a dusty plasma cloud, identified in mythic accounts as the Great Sea of primeval chaos. The differentiation of the planets and their observed movements in relation to each other and the electrical activity between these bodies provided the core content of ancient creation mythology. In the original accounts, creation meant events visible to humans on Earth. We've named 3 planets in the mythic Great Conjunction based on recorded astronomical traditions that trace to the birth of astronomy in ancient Mesopotamia. Saturn is the overarching luminary, named as the primeval sun. Venus is Mother Goddess and radiant eye, heart, and soul. And Mars is the dark, reddish, innermost body, the child in the womb of the goddess, the pupil of the feminine eye of the primeval sun. We followed the emergence of a triangular form recalled as the first form, the luminous seed of creation, and we've identified this unique form as the concrete celestial referent for the popular threefold goddess, three-faced goddess, or 3 goddesses in one. We've noted as well the explosive discharge activity associated with this triangular form and the essential role of the discharge ejecta as the mythic primeval matter of creation, the very material from which in the creation stories the gods were said to have constructed a great citadel in the heavens, the legendary homeland of the gods. Through local storytelling and reenactments across the centuries, this celestial dwelling came to be remembered as the ancestral homeland of every nation recounting these events. These core themes of an archetypal memory have taken us to the critical moment at which a bright crescent appeared on the gas giant Saturn due to light from the sun. This moment provides an extraordinary test of the reconstruction as a whole. Once we place the named bodies in 3-dimensional space, centered at the celestial pole, and allow for an illuminated crescent on Saturn, an inescapable conclusion will follow. The crescent must have rotated visually with the rotation of the Earth in a precise relationship to a cycle of day and night, with no counterpart and no analogy in anything occurring today. A star in the center of a rotating crescent. The image is recorded around the world. A crescent which, given the circumpolar placement, must have turned around the polar center in a daily cycle of brightening and dimming. No ambiguity, no compromise allowed. When seen with eyes wide open, how credible are the popular claims of historians, archaeologists, and comparative mythologists when they identify the symbolic crescent as our moon? By what reasoning would ancient sky worshippers have extravagantly and irrationally placed our little crescent moon into a configuration never seen but recorded independently by humans around the world? Always keep in mind that the mythic crescent does not stand alone. The great star of Venus in the center of the crescent is just one enigma in a crowd of unsolved mysteries. A particularly powerful addition comes from the mythic world mountain, a column of fire and light rising along the polar axis to pierce the crescent. That's what gave the crescent its mythic identity as the cleft peak, the horned peak, the twin arms or twin pillars of the sky. A subject we'll review one theme at a time. In its juxtaposition with the revolving crescent, the polar mountain adds crucially to the midnight appearance of the crescent in the most celebrated moment in the archaic daily cycle. No contrived reconstruction will ever account for this symmetry, and that's why a radical break from common understanding is so essential.
calculate what we will not tolerate, desperate to control all and everything, unable to forget the scarlet letter.